Today, our special guest is Kate Cohen. She's a Washington Post contributing columnist. She has a new book that is out, and we have some at the table back there. The book title is We Have Little Faith, Why I Stopped Pretending to Believe, and Maybe You Should Too. I've read it. I found it so incredibly relatable. The book shares her journey as a parent and as someone who has come to recognize the importance of being out and proud in her atheism. I love that this book has referenced so many different writers and thinkers of our time that I've read, and she makes them so accessible. It is such a wonderful read. Kate has several recent columns in the Post expressing forthright atheism and questioning the deference that American culture and politics extends to religion. She lives on a hay farm and an empty nest in Albany, New York, with her husband and many chickens, from what I understand. David and I were honored to be present when she was awarded the Freethought Heroine Award at the Freedom from Religion Foundation convention last month. Please welcome Kate Cohen.
Thank you so much, David and Jocelyn, for inviting me here today. Thank you all for coming. What an amazing crowd. Hi, Central Florida. I bring you greetings from upstate New York, where it's 41 degrees right now, so it's really nice to be here. I have to tell you, though, that when I told my friends I was coming to speak down here, they said, "Ooh, Florida." As if I were actually going to Ron DeSantis' house. I have a theory that the Electoral College encourages Americans to sort of squint at each state and just see it as entirely populated by whichever way it went in the last presidential election. So 2020, Florida goes for Trump 29-0, in other words, entirely. And so I guess every single one of you, except of course 48% of voters, practically half, but not electorally half, went for Biden. Even in the reddest of states, Wyoming, West Virginia, a quarter of voters are registered Democrats. In every place, there are always people, sometimes a lot of people, who don't match the prevailing culture. I grew up a Jew and a Democrat in a Christian and Republican part of Virginia. And when I left there, I worked in the cafeteria as a financial aid student at a very wealthy college. And then after college, I moved to a place that generally thinks people from the South are fake nice or genuine racist. So I'm used to not matching the culture around me. Actually, Albany, New York is a pretty good match. The county always goes Democrat by a wide margin, and I was impressed after my childhood at Temple Beth El in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which had to be all things to all Jews for miles around, to find myself after college living in a place with a choice of synagogues. Synagogues, plural. But as a young adult, I would have felt like I didn't match almost anywhere in America because I didn't believe in God. And Americans believe in God, right? One nation under God, in God we trust, God bless America. I never believed in God. I was raised Jewish, had a Jewish name, Jewish wedding, said lots and lots of prayers to God, from Sabbath dinners to my bat mitzvah, but I never thought he was actually listening. I believed in the Old Testament God in exactly the way I believed in Hamlet. What a great character. Hogs the stage, sort of self-involved, does some shitty things, isn't nice to women, but memorable. That's how I felt. But I didn't tell anyone for years. The first part of We Have Little Faith is about hiding what I really believed. just as many, many, many people do. I went along with what was going on around me, with what my parents did and said. I wanted to match, if not the Mennonites of the Shenandoah Valley where we lived, then at least my extended family and the small community of Jews at Congregation Bethel. I didn't just want to match, I did match. I sang the prayers at full voice. I stood when I was supposed to stand, and I sat when I was supposed to sit. But what I was thinking was entirely different from what everyone else was thinking. Maybe. Right? I picture myself as a child in synagogue, looking around at everyone else, assuming they were actually worshiping during worship service, instead of letting their minds wander like me. But how many of them didn't believe either? We don't really know how many atheists there are in America. We know that about 4 to 6% of Americans have called themselves atheists in a survey. We know that between 19 and 26% of Americans have told pollsters that they don't believe in God. We know that at least a small percentage of people who affiliate with a religion, who call themselves Catholic or Protestant or Jewish, also say they don't believe in God. We know that only 49% of Americans believe in the God of the Bible. And we know that at least some of the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, the group of Americans who aren't affiliated with any religion, do believe in God of some kind. So the statistics are murky. And part of the reason for that is that most polls are asking people to admit to being part of a minority that is feared and reviled, or disliked at the very least. To tell people they're the sort of person that people don't like. Atheists don't get a lot of positive press. Polls show that Americans don't trust us, they don't want to vote for us, and they don't want their children to marry us. Studies show that even atheists think serial killers are more likely to be atheists than believers. It's true. We're suspicious of ourselves. I don't know about you, but I always wanted to be liked. So I didn't tell anyone that I didn't believe what most people around me seemed to believe, that there was a higher power up there in charge of things. Not only did most people seem to believe in God, most people seemed to believe that believing in God was a baseline for being a good person. That's just like step one. So I actively deceived my college, and after college, I purposely misled Italian cousins whose Holocaust survival story I was researching for my first book. I got married in a Jewish wedding to another non-believer, with the God parts of the ceremony turned down, but not off. And then we had kids. Having kids is the moment in lots of people's lives when they return to their synagogues and their churches. They feel that to be good parents, they have to raise their children in a religion. Maybe they didn't go to church in college or as a young adult, but when they had a family, they felt a responsibility to the next generation. So did I, but in the opposite way. Having children made me realize, finally, that I didn't want to pass along to my children anything that I didn't believe. And I didn't believe that God was anything other than a very popular human invention. And so that is what I told them. I'm going to read you that scene from my book. The chapter is called Thunderbolt. I can tell you the exact moment when I started to raise my children as atheists. It didn't feel momentous at the time, but it was a moment. Noah was 5, Jesse was 3, and we were sitting on the couch reading from D'Aulaire's book of Greek myths, which was a holdover from my childhood bookshelf. Those illustrations really freaked me out as a kid. It's one thing to read that Cronus ate his babies, but it's quite another thing to see it. So naturally, I had to share that experience with my boys. Anyway, one of the boys asked what a myth was, and I told them it was a story about how the world works. People used to believe that these gods were in charge of what happened on Earth, and these stories helped explain things they didn't understand, like winter, or stars, or thunder. See, look, I flipped ahead to find a picture. Zeus has a thunderbolt. They don't believe them anymore? No, I said. That's why they call it myth. When people still believe it, they call it religion. Like the stories about God and Moses that we read at Passover, or the ones about Jesus and Christmas. They're just made up stories, like myths, but people still believe them. I'm sorry. Here's how the D'Aulaire's book begins. In olden times, when men still worshipped ugly idols, there lived in the land of Greece a folk of shepherds and herdsmen who cherished light and beauty. They did not worship dark idols like their neighbors, but created instead their own beautiful, radiant gods. Every people creates its own gods, I said. The little warm bodies nodded, and we proceeded to Gaia and the Titans, until I could feel Cronus lurking behind the next page. That was it, the big moment. I didn't set out to raise atheists per se. Before I had children, I certainly never planned to tell my children that religions were made up. I planned to read to them all the time and feed them food I made myself and make sure they wrote thank you notes. That was it. Except for one more thing. I plan to tell them the truth. I want to talk about truth for a minute. We of Little Faith is not an argument for atheism. It doesn't try to convince anyone to give up God. It's really an argument for telling the truth. But I'm not going to stand here and argue that honesty is always the best policy. If you give me a gift that I don't like, I will take great pains to deceive you on that point. When a telemarketer calls and asks for Kate Cohen, I get a little thrill from saying, I'm sorry, she's not here right now. May I take a message? And anyone who thinks seriously about that theoretical question of whether it's okay to lie to Nazis about the Jews who are hiding in your basement is just being silly. Of course it's okay. Lying is a tool. It's an amazing tool with which human beings can build a barrier between what's in here and everybody else. But I didn't want any barriers between my kids and me. So I told them what I really believed. But only them. When you have kids, you're so desperate for adult company, and then you meet other parents, and you just want to be liked. You want to be included. You want to match. So it took me a really long time to start being honest outside my own little home. But I made myself. Those damn kids made me. They're watching. They watch everything you do. And the more that I made myself, the more I started to doubt assumptions I had about other people based on where they were from or how they looked or sounded. Ooh, Florida. Let me tell you one story. This is from a chapter called We Are Not Alone. I'm back home in Virginia. I'm making small talk with an acquaintance of my mom's who was kind enough to let my son practice on his grand piano while we were visiting. And he's showing me around his flower garden. He's into growing flowers. I know nothing about flowers, so I'm kind of flailing. And this is a little section from that. We came to a stop at another small patch of not yet bloomed blooms surrounding a statue of Saint Fiacre, the name helpfully carved on the side, who was the patron saint of gardeners. According to legend, a 7th century bishop told him he could have as much land for his hermitage as he could surround with a furrow in a day, and with God's help, that turned out to be quite a bit. In a gesture of appreciation, and in the hopes of keeping the conversation off gardening, I offered, "I love saints." It's true, I do. "Now, I know you were raised Jewish," the good doctor replied. "Are you still Jewish?" This was a turn in the conversation I had not expected, and for which I was not prepared. Whether someone is still Jewish is not a question you hear in an area with a sizable Jewish population. Anyone familiar with Jews is also familiar with the concept that being Jewish is something that you can't change easily, or at all. You can be more or less observant, you can downgrade to culturally Jewish, but it's hard to give it up entirely. I'm pretty sure you can even convert to Hinduism and still be Jewish. So Dr. Flowers, that's what I call him, question revealed a certain provincialism. But in the tone of his voice, I heard open-mindedness, a willingness to entertain the idea that people change their beliefs. And his question revealed curiosity, too. This wealthy, white-haired, round-bellied Southern doctor was curious about me. I didn't know how to answer him. Partly because I didn't know the answer. Am I still Jewish-ish? And partly because I was loath to offend. His sincere question deserved a sincere response, but the word atheist, as we know, can turn people off. "Well," I said, "I still like the food, but I don't believe in any supernatural beings." I still couldn't say atheist. And then Dr. Flowers proceeded to tell me in his silky southern drawl that he, as a man of science, had a lot of trouble believing the Bible stories. The Easter story, for instance, gave him a lot of pause, and he told his pastor so. He still loved his church, but he bemoaned the way the church often treated people, particularly women, and the gays. That phrase, the gays, clanged in my New York ears. Again, my brain struggled to assimilate words that were sort of wrong with a sentiment that was just right. It turned out that Dr. Flowers' son was gay, and that revelation changed the doctor's mind about a lot of things. I was bad about it at first, for about a year, he confessed. I had a really hard time. And then my doctor said to me, "Do you love your son before you found out he was gay?" And I said yes. And he said, "And is he the same person now as he was then?" And boom, that kind of opened my eyes. Well, that kind of opened my eyes. But it wasn't the only time someone responded to my honesty with surprising honesty of their own. We all go around, I once did too, assuming that everyone else is a believer. I'll bet every private atheist in America knows someone who thinks they've never met an atheist before. I'll bet every private atheist in America sometimes feels like the only atheist in the room while chatting with another atheist who feels like the only atheist in the room. We won't know the truth until we tell the truth. When I first started writing We of Little Faith over a decade ago, I was really making an argument for people to be honest with one another in their personal lives. For parents to be honest with their children, for children to be honest with their parents, for friends to be honest with one another. For me, it was such a relief to get to talk to my kids about the big questions in life without having to pretend I thought there was or might be a heaven, or that there was or might be God. We could face the confusion and the dread and the joy of life together. No barriers between us. Not only that, but the more I gathered the courage to tell people outside my family that I was an atheist, the more I found that people responded not with disgust or even dismissal, but with stories about their own doubts, lack of faith, or religious upbringing. I had been hiding the truth because I was afraid of cutting myself off from people, afraid of not matching. But telling the truth turned out to be an incredible path to connection. And that's what I wanted to tell people, and that's the book I started to write all those years ago. But as America's politics began to change over the years, so did my project. As right-wing Christianity tightened its grip on our laws and our courts, I became more and more convinced that our cultural habit of deferring to religion, a habit I found irritating, but didn't really think of as harmful, I guess. That habit of granting legal carve-outs and tax cuts to religious institutions, listening to politicians end every speech with "God bless America," politely acting as if we all more or less believed in a higher power, was a habit we needed to break. There may be more nuns in America than ever before. People may be leaving their churches in droves, but religion is now, more than ever before, claiming and gaining an astonishing amount of political power. One thing I feel like I am safe in assuming about Floridians is that I don't have to explain to you the dire situation we can find ourselves in when Thomas Jefferson's wall of separation between church and state starts to crumble. You guys know. In New York, I have to make the case that, yes, reproductive freedom is protected by state law, but Catholic hospital conglomerates are taking over a growing percentage of hospital beds, receiving public money, and refusing to do perfectly legal and medically approved procedures like abortions and tubal ligations. In New York, I have to explain that no, we don't have school choice that gives parents vouchers for religious school, but we do have yeshivas, which receive all kinds of tax dollars and yet are allowed to leave their students entirely bereft of a secular education. In Florida, I can just say, gay. You guys know firsthand, without my having to connect any dots for you, the damage that religion in power can do. Don't say gay laws. Laws denying trans kids medical care. School library book bans. They are all motivated and or excused by religion. I believe I read that Governor DeSantis signed into law a record number of anti-LGBTQ bills this year. But of course, it's not just Florida. Laws that made legal abortion harder and harder to obtain even while it was still constitutionally protected, the Dobbs decision that struck down Roe v. Wade, the punitive abortion bans that followed, all of that has religion at its core. Not just at its core, right up at the surface. According to the bill itself, Missouri's total abortion ban was created in recognition that Almighty God is the author of life. What? And when religion loses a fight and progress wins instead, religion then claims it's not subject to the resulting laws, right? Religious belief is more and more at the state and federal levels a way to sidestep advances the country makes in civil rights, human rights, and public health. In 45 states and the District of Columbia, parents can get religious exemptions from laws that require school children to be vaccinated. 7 states allow pharmacists to refuse to fill contraceptive prescriptions because of their religious beliefs. Every business with a federal contract has to comply with federal non-discrimination rules unless it's a religious organization. Every employer that provides health insurance has to comply with the Affordable Care Act's contraceptive mandate, unless it's, say, a craft supply store with Christian owners. In Arizona last week, I don't know if you guys read this, a court ruled that the Mormon Church was not responsible for reporting a father's ongoing rape of his daughter, even though clergy knew about it, because religious confessions are exempt from the state's mandatory reporting law. It turns out that in 33 states, clergy are not subject to the laws that require teachers, physicians, psychotherapists to report suspected child sexual abuse to the police if they learned about that abuse in confession. I just found that out. I didn't know that. I'm still finding out the ways that religion is allowed to excuse behavior that we as a society otherwise condemn. Because of the concerted efforts of a small minority of Christian nationalists and the inattention or passivity of a large majority of Americans, our country's commitment to the first right enumerated in the Bill of Rights, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, is faltering. The Supreme Court has ruled that the citizens of Maine have to pay for parochial school, that a high school football coach should be free to lead a prayer on the 50-yard line, that a potential wedding website designer can reject potential same-sex clients. This past summer, Oklahoma approved the nation's first publicly funded religious school. Yes, there is one now. This fall, Texas began allowing schools to employ clergy members in place of guidance counselors. Our new Speaker of the House is a man who has said that God put him there and that his position on every issue can be found in the Bible, and that Christians have a duty to bring government, quote, under the sway of the principles of righteousness. Yikes. In a speech to an evangelical summit in September, Governor DeSantis said, there was a time when we were told, religious liberty is just simply if you can go to church for that 1 hour every Sunday and pray the way you see fit, that somehow is religious freedom. But the minute you try to bring that outside of the Sunday morning context, well, then the elites in our society are going to drop the hammer on that. You know what? I'm a nice, tolerant elite. You can go to church every day of the week, as far as I'm concerned. And if you don't want your children learning actual facts about U.S. history and menstruation, you can take them out of school. That's fine with me. I won't even make you get an abortion. But the moment you try to make me go to church when I'm trying to go to public school or my doctor's office or the fucking bathroom, yeah, I'm going to drop the hammer on that. Yeah. Which means I'm going to vote. I'm going to donate to Americans United for separation of church and state. I'm going to keep writing columns about religion overstepping its bounds and getting into my business. And I'm going to encourage people who don't believe in a supernatural creator all the skeptics, free thinkers, secular humanists, and nuns, the spiritual but not religious crowd, and yes, all the non-believers who are going through the motions to match with the other Jews and Christians and Muslims around them, to call themselves atheists in public out loud. Yes, atheists, because all those other descriptors might be true and accurate, but only the label atheist is clear and unambiguous. What the label atheist says is, I do not believe there's a supernatural being in charge of the universe. What the label atheist says is, God is a human invention. And the more of us who acknowledge publicly that that's what we're thinking privately, the more obvious it will be that what a particular character in a particular book has to say about morality should have absolutely no bearing on the laws that govern us. I believe atheists are in a unique position to fight back against Christian nationalism, but I think America needs us for more than that. I believe, and I think Election Day bolstered this belief, I believe that this rabid, nasty, discriminatory, violent, power-hungry strain of Christianity is going to fall. I think they've just gone too far. My heart breaks for all the people who will lose their freedom and their lives before we get reproductive rights back and repeal laws that were passed to punish trans people. But I think America might be waking up and noticing that someone's trying to take their freedoms away, and it's not fucking Joe Biden. So America needs atheists in that fight. Yes, it's not won yet by a long shot. But America also needs atheists for after this fever has passed. Because the one thing atheists know is that there is no divine justice. There is no God's plan. And knowing that makes us more active, more involved citizens. The nuns as a group may be checking out in some ways, but atheists are dialed in. We vote more, we donate more, we protest more, we work for political candidates. I want to read you one last little bit from my book. It's from part 2. So the first part is about my story of basically lying, and finally telling the truth. And the second part addresses, in turn, each of the benefits that religion confers or promises to confer, and tries to figure out whether atheists need those things, and if so, how can we get them? Because I think a lot of the reason people keep their atheism to themselves, or even the reason that non-religious people continue to pass on to their children religious belief of some kind, is because they think that's the only place they can get certain things that they need, that people need. So that's the second part of the book. I talk about death, which I think is why religion was really invented, to cope with or explain away our mortality. I talk about holidays. I talk about churches. I talk about prayer, morality, rites of passage. Well, the final chapter in that part is called Unplugging from the Higher Power. It's about accepting the fact that God isn't in charge, which is the one thing that atheists definitely have to do. You can still enjoy the trappings of the religion you were raised in. You can still enjoy Christmas. You can enjoy matzo ball soup. But if you're an atheist, you have to accept that the world is what people make it, not God. So I'm going to read, actually, I think I'm going to read this from the book. This section, you will not be surprised to hear, is called Thoughts and Prayers. And I refer at some point to a a school called Mott Hall Bridges, which is a very, very poor school in Brooklyn, New York. So that's something I talked about earlier in the chapter. Few American events are as grotesque as the massacre of school children by guns. In these moments, I will not contest it. Religion appears to offer consolation. Angel Garza said of his murdered 10-year-old daughter, "My little love is now flying high with the angels above." Part of me hopes that all the parents of children lost to gun violence are believers, that for the rest of their lives they live in an alternate reality, knowing that their children continue to live happily after death, watching out for their siblings, waiting for them to come home. But I hope the rest of us know that's not true, or at least that we act as if it isn't. Because I've just thought of something more grotesque than a massacre of school children by guns: the repeated massacre of school children. Best case, belief in God gives people solace when something terrible happens. Worst case, it allows them to shirk their very real responsibilities to one another while offering thoughts and prayers. Most people understand that bad religion that preaches hate and shame, has done terrible things, from slaughtering people who worship other gods, to enabling sexual predators, to withholding condoms in AIDS-ravaged countries. Bad religion is responsible, or at least an excuse for, some of the worst things people do to one another. But what about good religion? What about religion that clearly means no harm, tries to heal the world, or at least a small corner of it, and even inspires people to give up drinking, to start a school for poor students, to stay afloat until the Coast Guard comes, to make it through another grief-racked day? Bad religion endorsed slavery and sanctified racism. But didn't good religion fight for abolition and lead the civil rights movement? Yes, good religion has sometimes led us forward, but in the long run, it could still be holding us back. We may not want to think about it or to admit it, but we have the power to save not just Mott Hall Bridges, but all the schools that struggle to help kids in impoverished areas. We have the power to end poverty. We can end the epidemic of gun massacres. We have the power to regulate gun ownership, to outlaw the civilian possession of military-style weapons, to buy back AR-15s, to hold gun manufacturers financially and legally liable for the carnage. Australia stopped it, New Zealand stopped it, England stopped it, Norway stopped it. But we can't stop it if we believe that a massacre is simply God calling his angels home. If we believe he has a mysterious plan that involves children hiding among their friends' dead bodies to keep from being shot themselves. We have to believe that what controls the circumstances of one human's life is humans, not just individually, but in the systems that we create together. Talking as if God were in charge encourages us to act as if he is. As if the differential between rich schools and poor schools, as if the next school massacre were not ultimately our responsibility. But they are. The next school massacre will not happen on God's watch. It will happen on ours. Thank you. Yeah, so there's a lot that's funny in the book, I promise. But that is really my answer to why America needs atheists. You know, not just now, not just in this current fight, but as a culture, as a whole. we need people who are willing to say, no, that's made up, and we have work to do. So that's it.
When you gave the example of the priest hearing confession and then being exempt from reporting the abuse that he was hearing
Yes.
of a minor child or whatever the abuse is, how does that square or compare with doctors or therapists, what they are legally required to report, like a doctor who sees a minor child who has been being abused, or a therapist?
That's an excellent question. I really want to find out myself what the limits are. Who has a higher sort of threshold that they have to meet? But my impression is that it's pretty strict. That if you hear something in a kind of medical situation, you have to act. Mandatory reporting. So, and obviously there is, doctor-patient confidentiality, but in certain cases, it does not pertain, and I believe that child sexual abuse and child, physical abuse are two of those cases. I don't know yet. I just found out about this, and I think I'm going to have to write about it. My next column was going to be about soup, how much I like to make soup, and they keep doing stuff that I just feel like I have to write about this. I was shocked.
Do you have any thoughts on how to approach elderly people with the truth? My current feeling is if they appear to be somewhat alert and attentive and interested in what's going on around them, all right, I'll tell them what I think is the real truth. If they're someone who's just tottering on the edge and never had an intellectual thought in their life, then I'm inclined to just let it go and not say anything. I'm wondering what your thoughts might be.
I mean, I agree with you that it's a judgment call. I guess what I would say is that my experience, with regard to this book, but even before, as I was gradually getting more comfortable talking about it, is that my judgment was almost always wrong. I mean, in the sense that people wanted to talk about it more than I had expected. People that I really did not, and right now there's people texting my mother that my mother was sure that they would have been offended by, my book or whatever, but texting to say how much they agreed and how happy they are that I'm saying these things. So you just never know. I feel like if you feel safe and you feel like you can make the other person feel safe, it might be worth a shot. That's been my experience.
How did your family take it?
Well, my family, as I said, I was raised Jewish. I was bat mitzvah. We lit the Sabbath lights every Friday and everything. But I don't really know. I didn't know as a kid. I don't really know how much they believed. They never really talked about God outside of those ceremonial occasions. They never used God to tell me, to keep me in line or anything like that. So they cared about pleasing their parents. I don't think they really cared on a believing level. And so they were fine. And now they're all sort of, backfilling their previous position to say, oh yeah, that's how I felt too. But that's my family. We were living near my husband, this is Adam, my husband Adam's family, and that was more difficult. And that story is in the book because his father was very observant Jew and insisted that his children also be, and so there's a story that I tell about when our first baby was born. We decided not to do a bris. And my father-in-law refused to hold his grandbaby.
What's a bris?
A bris is a ritual circumcision. Thank you very much. So it's a ritual circumcision, and so it's expected of a Jewish boy, and we didn't want to have a party to celebrate the snipping of my child's penis. And so we didn't. We thought we were very brave. I guess in some ways we were being very brave because we live right down the street from my in-laws, and but we had no idea that, anyway, he didn't hold his grandbaby. And for 8 days, well, I don't know how he picked 8 days, because that's when the bris would have been, and then I guess maybe he realized it didn't work, he didn't make us do it, so then, no.
That was the agreement he had with his rabbi.
Oh, okay, so there you go. So it was really upsetting. And then, I guess 13 years later, I had to, actually tell him in no uncertain terms that his grandbaby was who was now 13 was not going to be bar mitzvah, and that was really my first moment of standing up in a very definite way that I probably should have done before. But yeah, so it wasn't really my family that was at all an issue. And even my father-in-law now will say, yeah, I didn't really believe in God, or I don't think it matters if you believe in God. I mean, even he, who I thought was incredibly rigid and would never talk about it. I mean, part of it is he's getting old, and he's reconsidering a lot of things, in his life. But even he, is now is willing to have conversations that I thought were impossible. So maybe they were at the time. I'm sorry, maybe they were at the time, but they're not now.
Hi, you mentioned that atheists need to be more involved to kind of stop this religious taking over of our country, basically,
Yeah.
and changing the laws. So what I've noticed is when, like Roe v. Wade was overturned, and Don't Say Gay, and all these other laws are passed, there's many people outraged, but they're afraid to say what the catalyst is, religion.
Yeah.
So because you can't fix a problem if you don't understand where
That's
it's coming from. So
interesting.
how do you recommend, because we can't tiptoe, we're losing ground, so what do you recommend we do?
I mean, that is really an argument for naming yourself and for trying to be more forthright in every conversation you have. I'm sure you are, but I just it's a fight that has to be fought on so many fronts. So I really feel like the atheist front, the sort of attitude of bewilderment that people are making laws, based on the morality of a character in a book, is one front for sure. There are also Christians against Christian nationalism. There are clergy who have brought suit because Missouri's extreme abortion ban runs counter to what their religions, say is acceptable. So there's lots of fronts. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to name the core thing, and I try to, every time the Washington Post will let me, I'm going to write another piece. This time it's about the clergy penitent, exemption. I don't know. Yeah, we just have to have the courage to name ourselves and name the problem, and maybe even to people we don't think want to hear it. So.
How often does the Post let you have a contribution? I know we have rules on that in the Orlando Sentinel locally, but.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my contract is just once a month. They'll let me do what I want. And I don't want to be a one-issue person. I think a lot of atheists are like, that's not all I think about. It's not all it's not all I'm interested in. And so I'm careful not to do it all the time. But boy, you really could. I mean, there really is, there's something about, some way in which religion is overstepping its bounds. And then Mike Johnson, like the last one. I had to write about Mike Johnson. He's terrifying. Anyway.
I have always thought that God is like Santa Claus,
Yeah.
because he shows up once a year and then disappears 365 days.
I mean, I have found out, I didn't write about it as much as I would like to, but there are people who don't do Santa Claus because they're afraid that when their kid finds out that there's no Santa Claus, they will make the obvious connection between some other benevolent being who might not exist, So, yeah, there's a very strong connection there. And I actually feel like Santa Claus could be a good way for people to think about God in the sense that, okay, none of us here believes in Santa Claus. None of us here believes in Santa Claus. Oops. But we still use Santa Claus. We still enjoy Santa Claus. We still tell stories about Santa Claus. We appreciate him as a cultural figure. And I think if we could just shift God into that sort of metaphorical zone, which a lot of people have. A lot of people have shifted him into that metaphorical zone, and I'm good with that. I think right now we have to be super clear, and some people are very literal, so we have to be a little bit literal right now too. But at some point, he is a character. He's a great character, and that's okay.
So glad you're here. Thank you.
you.
Can we be hopeful about Gen Z?
I mean, I made 3 of them. I think they're great, but I feel like the data on, in terms of leaving religion is very positive. I don't know. I think maybe one of our jobs might be to make sure they know that atheism can be a positive thing, not just a rejection, you're not just checking out, that there's something else to it. But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Mine are super dialed in politically. And I think that is one of the reasons that there's such a strong push from Republicans and right-wing Christian nationalists to indoctrinate, but also to undermine democracy, because I think they see the numbers, they see what's going to happen, they see probably what already is happened. And in this last election, when people got to actually vote on abortion in Ohio or something, it's very clear. They have to stack the deck or it's not going to work. So I think they see what's going to happen with the next generation. Yeah.
You were inspired by your children, to tell the truth. I was curious about their experience. I was one of the oddball kids before it became more accepted. I didn't believe in God, but I also knew to be quiet about it in school. I just didn't say the under God part. I felt weird during Christmas, but it did come up for me, and I had the experience of everyone turning to look at me. You don't believe in God? I have some of those moments.
Right.
And as far as your kids and their friends, are they doing better in that regard? Is there support for children that, are openly atheist who don't believe? Because I know for me, I wouldn't change it, but it was a very lonely place. And I would like to know what we can do to support these kids growing up. Do they have support in school? Mm-hmm. Is there anything available like that? Are your kids having these kind of experiences too?
Well, several things. My kids are called Cohen Greenberg, right? That's their last name. So I feel like that sort of experience of being a minority, that was their experience of being a minority, I guess, was being Jewish. And I mean, there were other Jews in their school district and everything, but that gave them that sense of outsiderness. I don't know who they told, or or not. I do think that thinking differently from other people, it's kind of a useful position in a way. I don't know if this has been your experience, but it feels like a good place to be if you want to think critically about your culture. Yeah, I mean, all of them, they're all writers. They're all thinking about things, and I think that probably had something to do with it. In terms of support in school, I just feel like our first job is to get religion out. School, in theory, does support atheism. I mean, right? An educational system that is about, is about knowledge, how to get knowledge, how to think about things, what the facts as they really are, all of that stuff. That would support atheists. So we just need to begin by getting religion out, I think.
Hi, thank you very much for being here. I'm kind of pessimistic, and I wonder what you think about the hope of changing people's minds or even dealing with them. In my career, I have come across any number of people who happily identify as Christians, which to me is a warning. I have to say it's kind of a warning sign. But when you talk about a book like Under the Banner of Heaven or something like that, and talk about Mormon, the radical Mormons, or talk about the Mormon religion at all, I have had this happen a number of times. That people are very happy to sneer and smirk and make fun of, Joseph Smith and the Peeping Stones and the Angel Moroni and the fact that he rewrote the book because God knew he liked sex, all of this kind of stuff. They readily agree that is, not believable, but they are absolutely committed to the notion that the things that supposedly happened 5,000 years ago rather than 200 years ago. And I'm wondering if you run into these people, and if it comes up, and where is the hope that those people are ever going to be logical?
I think expecting them to be logical is a losing game. I agree with you. Because it's like people have a separate part of their brain for that thing that they were taught when they were kids. I mean, that is a big part of it, right? These are not things they would believe now. If you took a grown-up and you said, okay, here's the story, and this really happened, this is not something that a grown-up would believe. It's because it started when they were kids, and to excavate that and no, good luck. So the thing to do, I think, is to stop the transmission as much as possible. Keep it from moving on to the next generation. Not just the what I would say, I shouldn't say crazy, not just the literal biblical believers, but also those of us who are maybe heaven is real, or some people think God is true, or whatever. People who aren't willing to sort of really state clearly how they see the universe, because there's a lot of pressure on us not to. Even those people need to stop.
How do you sell someone on the fact, we would say it's a fact, that you are going to cease to exist someday? Your personality, your beliefs, the wonderful smells of this world, the sights, they're all going to be gone because you'll be gone. How do you sell them on that as being superior, or I believe as being superior to theirs?
It's not superior. It's not. I mean, I guess you could think about, okay, what would heaven really be like, and who's really there? Is my ex-husband there? Is my, whatever. So in that sense, if you play it out, I guess maybe it's superior. No, obviously, people want to believe that they're going to go on forever and ever. I don't think you can sell it, and I think that's why we're in the situation that we're in. I walk through this in my book because one of our kids was really worried about death, and which made me really worry about death. No, which made me really walk myself through it for the first time I had ever done it. I mean, it is amazing to have kids in the sense that you kind of finally do things mentally and just in life that you should have done already, but you didn't. So it's like a second chance. Anyway, so I walk myself through it. I mean, I really feel like the first thing is that you won't feel anything. So yeah, you won't have all the wonderful things in life, but you won't know it, you know? That doesn't sound great, but it doesn't sound scary either. And that's where I start, and then, well, you'll just have to read the book. You know?
I evolved from Catholic school, and I was definitely the local heretic by the time that was over. I have found, and I want to see if you agree with this, I would say if they asked, I would say, I'm an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And that acted as a filter. The people I didn't want to have as friends went away. They were like, get thee behind me, Satan, and started throwing holy water as they ran. But the people that I wanted in my life that added value to my life and that were intelligent, they stayed.
Right.
So it acted as a filter.
Mm-hmm.
At what point in your evolution did that happen, and then secondly, at what point did you realize that it was actually a pretty useful filter if you used it right?
You know, I don't know the people who avoid me because of being an atheist. I think it might have filtered out people who don't want to have conversations or something. I go ahead and put myself out there in a lot of ways because I'm just, life is short. Life is short. And so I would rather be interacting with people who really want to be honest. So I don't know. That's an interesting thought. And Rebecca Vitzman is an atheist who you might have heard of. She's the one who was interviewed after a tornado went through and destroyed everything. And she told Wolf Blitzer that no, she didn't feel blessed. She was an atheist. So I called her up. And I said, and she was not planning on outing herself. Her parents didn't know, nothing, right? I called her up eventually, and I said, so what happened? You were in Oklahoma. This wasn't like me in upstate New York, no big deal, or whatever. And she said, it was fine, and kind of what you're saying. The people who couldn't even wrap their minds around it, they just stayed clear, and then everybody else would come up to her in airports and say, thank you so much for being honest. So I think you're probably right. I don't read the comments on my columns. So you guys have to tell me, how ugly it got. But mostly, maybe because of that filtering effect, it's just been a very positive experience.
I'm just wondering, in thinking about the sort of societal conversation around recent issues like Palestine and the abortion issue, I noticed that the middle ground of those conversations often gets represented by reasonable religious people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder how we take a secular viewpoint sort of off the fringes of those kinds of discussions around those issues.
Again, I guess I would say it's just going to have to be more and more people being upfront about what they believe and not leaving it to the reasonable religious people, the good religious people. I mean, thank goodness for the good religious people. But and I think it goes to your point about making that point that there is religion underneath a lot of this stuff. Making that clear. I think it's really going to have to be people gathering the courage to reveal that they really don't think that there's a God involved in any in any human affairs. And I don't know. I think we can do it. I think there's so many more of us than people think. If you just look at the number of times that you've been quiet about it, what you think, and extrapolate. So, thank you. Thank you.